Hi, my name is Nick Cosentino, and I'm a principal software engineering manager at Microsoft. In this interview, I was joined by Emily Jowers, who is a staff software engineer. In this conversation, we got to go over Emily's core values, including ownership, simplicity, empathy, and transparency. And personally, I very much align with all of these, so I thought it was really cool to hear her perspective and her interpretation of what these mean to her. Now, we got to go over a lot of Emily's work experiences, and there's a lot of government work and stuff included in that. So it was really interesting to hear about different situations where you might be working very closely with a customer versus not, having customers that are hands on with what they're asking for versus sitting back and letting you drive more. So I think that this is really valuable information for a lot of software engineers, especially because some software engineers don't really get a lot of this exposure. If you enjoy conversations like this, let me know by leaving a comment below so I can get more people on for these interviews. Thanks, sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Emily, why don't for viewers, why don't you give us a little bit of rundown for way from the beginning? When did you know that you were like, I'm doing code? Like, what did that look like for you? And then I'd love to hear kind of your journey to where you got to now.
Yeah. So when I was 5 years old, um, I decided I wanted to be a mechanical engineer, and that is what I went to school for. I never really, I like had a very brief blip of like maybe I'll do art,
Okay.
um, and then I went right back to mechanical engineering. So I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree, but while I was in school, I got a job doing web development.
Okay.
I there was a research foundation that was associated with my university, and I applied for every engineering position that they had, whether I was qualified for it or not. In fact, they had a little checkbox at the bottom that you could check that was like, are you qualified for this job? And for the job I got, I had checked that checkbox. I had not checked that checkbox. I was like, I'm not qualified for this, but I'm applying anyways. Um, I went into the interview. They were like, "Have you ever used HTML?" I was like, "Nope, I've never done any of it." I was like, "I took a Java class in high school. That's about the extent of my programming experience." And they hired me. And so I learned web development there and really loved it. But I was already my junior year of college, so I wasn't going to switch to computer science. So I ended up getting a computer science minor,
Awesome.
switching to another department at that same company and getting a full-time role. But I really just like learning HTML and CSS in that job was so much fun. Like I had amazing coworkers. We were all students. They had a team of like 20 students there, and it was
Wow.
just super fun. The all the like adult full-time workers
Yep.
were very helpful, good mentors. They were really big about like training everybody, and they really let us own a lot of things that I feel like
Mm.
it's rare to let juniors own. And I couldn't even really call myself a junior. Like I was still a student, hadn't graduated. I was student low man on the totem pole, but like we would find things and we'd be like, this is kind of crappy, can we fix it? And they'd be like, sure, like make a design, show it to us. And like I redid part of the asset management system for this company because I was like, this is really clunky and I feel like it could be a lot better. And he was like, yeah, I agree, you should make up a proposal and we can work on it. And that was really cool for me. I feel like I learned so much there. um, Something that I wish more people got the opportunity to do early on is like not be handed like, here's a copy change, here's a really small insignificant thing. Like they let us do big stuff,
Right.
and it was really cool.
I, I feel like that can make a tremendous difference. I can think, well, when I had internships, I had a little bit of that, but my first full time job, like out of school, was very much like just this feeling of like autonomy, not like we could just do anything we wanted and like whatever the company doesn't matter, but like there was so much trust from my boss and a lot of autonomy. It was like these are our goals, and like make it happen. And like he kind of moves out of the way, and it was empowering. It was exciting, and I think having this like safe place to mess up and hey, like it's okay, like we'll try something else, we'll get better. Just having this feedback loop of like feeling like you can have an impact for me was like very empowering. So it kind of sounds like you had this ability to have autonomy, and that's really what like made it seem really cool for you.
Yeah, it was really awesome. And when I transitioned to the other area, it was the same. Like they, I just me and a small team of, again, student engineers designed a whole prototype that we showed to an Air Force general. We had to demo it to him to get funding to make the whole project. And like we did it. In 3 months, we made a prototype for something that we got to demo to this big fancy person.
Did you have a lot of interactions like that in that job, or was this like a huge outlier to be able to do that?
No, that was kind of how it was there. They employed a ton of students because they were associated with the university, and they did a lot of government contracts. So there was a lot of generals and things that were around. But yeah, they really trusted all of us. Like, and they were always there to help, but we for the most part lived up to their expectations. I think because we were kind of empowered by that.
Right.
And we were like, we're going to prove that we can do this. And I definitely worked some of my latest nights there. There were a couple nights I was in the office until midnight, but it's
Yeah.
you work for doing satellite software. It's like the satellite is launching into space on this date. That's the hardest deadline you could possibly have. Like if it's not done, the satellite can't go into space. So
Right.
that's
That
what we
seems like
do.
a big deal, right? It's not like, hey, we can roll out the software on Tuesday instead of Monday. It's like there's something literally going into space, and like you can't hold this up.
Gotta be ready. And anytime that you have to send a software update, that's a time that you can't be like using the satellite for something. If the satellite's supposed to take pictures and you have to send a software update, it can't take pictures until you're done doing the software update. So
Right.
they try to minimize that.
Yeah. I could imagine operating a satellite in general, aside from just putting it into space, that sounds kind of expensive. But I can imagine having a satellite operating is probably like someone's watching the amount of time and the effectiveness of that satellite. So
Yeah.
very cool. How did so it sounded like you had opportunities to demo and stuff. What about like throughout the development process, were there customer interactions, or was this kind of like all proxied through, like, I'm going to call them like the adults of the engineering team? Like, did they do that, or did you guys get to have some of that exposure?
Yeah. As a student, I didn't have a lot of interaction with the actual government contacts. That was mostly filtered down to us. But for the most part, this software was something that we were kind of developing ourselves and then giving to people. There was one main Air Force customer that we were kind of developing it for, but as it grew, we just kind of were like, these are things we think people need, and we would add them.
Right.
So I didn't have a lot of direct customer interaction in that job, but I have in some of my later jobs. It's something I actually really enjoy when it's possible. Um,
What does that look like? So maybe not in that role, but as you kind of progress in your career, like what does that look like when you have to, instead of just, okay, we're going to put my head down, we're going to build software, when you have to start saying like getting customer requirements or kind of going back and forth from your experience, what does that look like?
yeah, I worked for two other government contracts after that.
Okay.
Totally different company. I've had quite a few jobs. Um, but at those, we had the customers actually come in and work with us directly. And I had very different experiences at those. And some they
Okay.
were like, yeah, this is really good, but can we add this? Like they were encouraging and they were excited about it. And at other ones, they were like, this is garbage. Can you fix it? Um, so
Wow.
two like very different styles. Um, but it taught me a lot about how to work with different people. Um, but I found that like if we were excited about it, other people tended to be nicer about it. If we didn't like it, then other people kind of I feel like felt that.
Okay.
And at the one where the people were a little more aggressive and negative, I guess, I felt like we weren't as happy with the product.
Interesting.
And that was something where we went in, we were like, we know that it's not perfect and we're going to fix this and this and this. And they were like, yeah, you're right. It's garbage. You should fix it. But I think if we had gone in, we'd be like, hey, we've improved this and this is getting better and we have plans for this. Let us show it to you. I think that it probably would have gone over better because they would
Okay.
have seen more of the positive things than all the negative things we were pointing out. Um, but Yeah, I still like getting direct customer feedback because it really helps you feel like you're actually making something for someone to help
Right.
someone, and you can see how it is gonna like make their work or their life better.
This is just a brief interruption to remind you that I do have courses available on Dome Train focused on C Sharp. So whether you're interested in getting started in C Sharp, looking for a little bit more of an intermediate course focused on object-oriented programming and some async programming, or are you just looking to update your refactoring skills and see some examples that we can walk through together, you can go ahead and check them out by visiting the links in the description and the comment below. Thanks, and back to the video. Maybe it looked different across the two, but in those scenarios, did like, what did it look like for gathering requirements, if I can call it that? Like, were you guys basically making proposals about things and saying, like, do you like it? Or did they kind of say, like, we have this list of requirements and expectations, like, please deliver on this, or something totally different?
Yeah, again, two totally different experiences at the two places. The first place, it was a little bit of a free for all. It was like it was like we have an experience, we're trying to make it better.
Okay.
So we had a lot of free range to figure out what that meant. So we did have an engineering manager, and we had a lot of direct customer feedback there. So we would kind of like throw together proof of concepts and show it to them and see what their reaction was. And in some cases, they were like, "Yeah, this is a great like way to improve this." And in other cases, they're like, "Why would we want this?" And so we tried to really do like MVP, like true MVP, small stuff, so that
Hmm.
we could show it off. And then if they liked it, we'd try to refine it. Um, so that was one method for
Sure.
free range, and there were fun things about that, but it was also sometimes difficult to not have a lot of direction because the customer
I
really
see.
didn't know what they wanted. They were like, just make it better. Like, okay.
Okay. So
Um,
it was the uncertainty around like the expectations they had, that's the part that made it difficult. Even though you had like say free reign, it's like okay, we can go in this direction, and you're like fingers crossed it's going to be the thing they want, like, and that's what made it kind of difficult.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I was still pretty early in my career, and I didn't really know how to lead them towards refining their ideas.
Okay.
I feel like that's something that I've learned a lot more over time. But they were just like, make it better. And we were like, how? And they were like, we don't know. We'll know it when we see it. And I would have asked a lot more probing questions, been like, okay, well, what's difficult now? And um, like, what are you trying to get out of this experience that you're not getting out of it now? But then I was just like, okay, we'll try. And we did a lot of good things, and we did a lot of things they didn't like. And we slowly figured out what they wanted and worked in that direction. But I
Right.
think it could have been done a lot faster,
Right.
probably.
It's almost like you had to kind of
Um,
get lucky along the way, and just like it's almost like you're going in blind, being like, okay, like we're trying this, and then they're like, not quite, and then you try something else, and they're like, yeah, that's warmer, and you go, okay, like back to being blind. What about now? And they're like,
yeah,
that's colder, and you have to keep just figuring it out.
mhm. It's interesting. The other place I was, we had much more. We actually like had defined requirements.
Okay.
So we would meet with them, and they'd be like, "We need this, this, and this integrated into this software." And it was tracking cybersecurity vulnerabilities, is what the software was for. Um, and so they'd be like, "Yeah, we love this thing you just put in. Now we need this workflow." It's like we do this manually now. We want it automated, and we'd be like, "Cool." And we'd observe how they did it manually, create requirements off of that, and then integrate it into the software. So that was much more. Um, Trying to think of the word,
Like, oh,
organized.
not quite prescribed. Yeah, organized. I think that's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a much better direction. Like we knew that this was something they wanted, and um, it might, we might still need to iterate on it afterwards, but we weren't just shooting in the dark,
Right.
um, which was good. We always knew
Did
that we
that
were making something productive.
right? Yeah, yeah. Did that ever feel like and in this second case, did that ever feel like it was almost I'm going to use the word prescribed, or did it ever feel like they were telling you like this is the solution, or were they still kind of like these are the goals, like these are the things, the problems we want you to solve, and it's kind of up to you to come up with the implementation of the solution.
We still were pretty involved in the implementation. It was fairly collaborative because, I mean, they had essentially their whole process had been manual before, like Excel sheets, sometimes on paper.
Oh
Um,
boy.
a lot of government stuff is it's still pretty antiquated and very disconnected. So I always really enjoyed my work because I felt like I was making huge impact. Like I was taking something that was on paper or in an Excel file, and we were making software that automated it, that made it so much easier and more efficient. And I liked that, like they already knew what they needed. They knew what they were doing now, and
Right.
so they're like, here's what we have. This is what we do now. Can you make it better? And we were like, absolutely, we can make it better. This is awful.
Yeah.
um,
No, that's
They never
that's
felt too prescribed to me. I was glad that they gave us direction. That was really helpful.
yeah, it's interesting that you had these two very different experiences, right? And I think probably one of the really awesome takeaways though from your experience is that you had these customer interactions, because I feel like a lot of people go through their careers where they don't. You might have like a, I don't know, like a product owner, and I mean, like I've always dealt with product owners, but we've been very close, like to the customers, and had really good product owners as user proxies. But I can imagine some people go their entire careers or most of their career where even with the product owner, like they feel very disconnected from customers and users, and they're like, someone's telling me this needs to be built, and okay, I understand the requirements, and I guess I just go make it happen.
Yeah,
Do you feel like
yeah,
that made a big difference for you though, like in terms of getting that like connection to the customer, or even if it was a bit of a proxy that was like motivating for the work?
yeah. I think it shaped how I viewed software development in general from the beginning. Empathy is one of my core values, and I feel like
Yes,
it
yeah.
started there. I began with empathy for the customer because I actually got to talk to them, see what their problems were, and I could fix them. Um, and yeah, like I feel like my empathy has grown into different areas, but it started with empathy for the customer.
Right.
I knew what they needed, I knew what their pain points are. I could kind of like sit in their seat and yeah, understand their issues, and it
Right.
really made me feel fulfilled to be able to fix those things.
But this is transitioned not from just customer empathy though, but because we have a couple of your core values that I want to make sure we're talking through, but empathy is one. So this
Mhm.
is transition to be more than just customer empathy, but like what does that look like for you as a core value as a software engineer?
Yeah, I think that as I grew and went up as a software developer. When I got to senior, that empathy started extending towards my team. So I started feeling the
Okay.
pain points of my team, the inefficiencies of my team, the things that made working on my team difficult. And so I started trying to fix those things. So it started with empathy for the customer. I want to fix your problems. To empathy for my team. I want to fix your problems. To now as a staff, I feel like I'm starting to really understand the business and empathize with like our senior leaders, and understand like what they're trying to work towards and help them achieve their goals. So not just helping the customer, helping my team, but helping the business as well. And I feel like that's kind of how I've transitioned as I've moved up, and hopefully I'll continue to work on that business side, get more of the big picture thinking.
Yeah.
um,
Well,
you can get all
it's a
the
good
things
call out.
done.
It's a good
Yeah.
call out because you explained this process of like taking something like empathy and the type of impact that has as you become more senior, right? You're kind of, it's not that you like drop the focus of the customer, right? Like, hey, I don't empathize with the customer anymore. That's in the past. Or now that you're kind of taking more of like a how do I help business leadership perspective of empathy, it's not that you gave up on the team, right? These are things that kind of layer and stack. And I think talking to people that are trying to become more senior in their software engineering career, one of the things that I like to mention is like your your impact and like your sort of circle of influence, these are things that continue to grow and increase as you become more and more senior. And like again, if you just drop the customer empathy and went just to your team, then you drop the team empathy and went just to business leadership, you're just kind of moving the impact. And maybe there is greater impact in some of these areas, but if you layer them and it just continues to grow, then like ultimately you have an overall bigger impact purely just with this empathy core value.
Yeah. And I love having a big impact. I think everybody does. Everybody wants to have impact. But I think a lot of what I do centers around service, both in my personal life and at work. But I feel incredibly fulfilled by serving people. And I think that's part of where it stems from. Like, I want to help you. I want to help
Right.
you. I want to help everything. I want to help you get over your problems and be faster and more efficient and save money or make money or whatever you need. I like making people happy, and I think that's a lot of where it comes from. Like, I feel like I can do that through software. I can make your manual annoying processes automated, and I can make things simple, and I can make things beautiful, and that's really what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's like when you have that lens, you can start to identify the problems, right? Like you can listen to people, you can hear where the challenges are, you can be observant about these inefficiencies or opportunities even, right? Because sometimes you'll hear people saying like this sucks, like the it take I can't get my work done, it's always taking so long, and it's like, oh well, what's going on? Well, the build system's slower, the tests keep failing and they take 5 hours to run and I have to rerun them and I can't get my code checked in this month.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, okay, like so let's, you can start to break these things down and go, okay, well, first of all, that really sucks because you know what that would feel like. That would feel pretty bad. And then you can start to say, okay, well, what are these pieces? Like, how come the build part? Like, that seems like a bad experience if you'd have to wait X hours or whatever it is to go build. Like, how can we dive into this? And you can truly understand, like, if we start making these things better, now all of a sudden everyone as a whole is getting better, right? Like, it truly is like just impact through like scaling things out like that. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
What if you don't mind me asking, because I don't want to put you on the spot to like try and articulate this, but when it comes to empathy like this, if you wanted to encourage someone else, right? Like, hey, like this is something a core value for you that you're like, I think this is key. Obviously, in your career, you've really valued this. But for like someone, listening or watching, if they were like, that sounds interesting, like how would I start to like try and like lean into that? Do you have any advice for them that they might try?
Yeah. I think the first thing is really observing people, getting to know people. So, starting with the customer, because I was able to have interactions with the customer, and even in my first job where I didn't directly interact with the customer, I feel like we understood the customer pretty well. So, um, I mean, the first step is just trying to understand people. So if you don't have access to a customer, you can start with your team. But I always liked really getting to know my coworkers, knowing what their motivations were, and why they were working there, and you can what they like doing, what they don't like doing. Now, as a staff engineer, I actually lead other devs, so I do that a lot. Try to communicate with them and be like, hey, what do you like doing? What do you not like doing? What's good at work? What's bad at work? In and out of work? Some people don't like talking about their personal lives, but that can be helpful too,
Sure.
just to understand everybody's motivations and where they're coming from. And um, there are some times in your life where you're really motivated to make career progress, and other times when you're like, I've got other stuff going on,
Yep.
and I'm here to do my work, but I don't really need to be going above and beyond. And knowing that as a leader really helps you optimize work for them. I have my own opinions about like what I like doing and what I don't like doing, and if I assume that everybody else likes the same things, I'm usually wrong. Um,
That's
I have
a
some dev.
very good point.
Yeah,
It's like situational leadership, right? Like one of the things I was taught, like I became a manager very early in my career by not quite by accident, but like just kind of out of almost like necessity at a startup. But my HR leader at the time, like the first thing that she like instilled upon me was like situational leadership, because I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm like just graduated university and like I barely, just started work. And she said, like, you have to remember that everyone's different. And I'm like, obviously everyone's different. Like that's not rocket surgery. But her point was like, so when you're trying to help guide people, you can't just think like, what is Nick like? And like it seems obvious until you're in these situations where you're like, oh, you're having challenges at work or you want to grow in your career. Like you must want the same things I want, because it's just like this default perspective. And it's like, that's just not how it works. So I love your point about if people want to start to lean into that, truly just like building these relationships with people at work or with customers, like just understanding. It seems like a simple thing, but like invest the time to do it, and you can actually learn a lot from doing that.
Yeah. I will say I really like the Caring Techie on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Irina Stanescu. I probably butcher her name, but
I don't know how to say her last name either, but I know exactly who you're talking about. Yes.
I think empathy is a big thing for her, and I love how she talks about how she forms relationships with people. So that's another. Go follow her on LinkedIn. Put that
Yes.
place.
Awesome. Okay, well, was talked about empathy a little bit. You have three more that we want to touch on. I don't know what a good segue is. Maybe ownership. I think ownership was a, because you started to talk about some autonomy and pieces like that. I wonder if ownership is like, from your perspective, do you kind of I don't want to say equate, but would you say ownership goes alongside the autonomy? And because you mentioned like this feeling of empowerment and being like, hey, we have autonomy, like, and we'd stay up late and try to get things done. Like, I'm assuming that was kind of like an ownership feel. Is that your perspective, or do you kind of look at it a different way?
Yeah, I think I see ownership as a core value of all over the place. Like I feel like every company ownership is a core value somewhere, and people think of it in different ways.
Okay.
Mine definitely started with that first job where they were like, "Yeah, you want to do something? Own it, take it, from start to finish, get it done." And I really enjoyed that. I've always liked, yeah, people trusting me, I guess, to get stuff
Yeah.
done. Hate being micromanaged. I don't know that anybody likes being micromanaged. I've also worked mostly for small companies and startups, so super important there. But just, I guess, really taking pride in something being good and something being quality. I really believe, especially as a leader, that I own everything that I do. I own the blame when things go wrong for myself and for my team, but I share the praise. Like, if something goes wrong, it's my fault. In almost every case, there's something I could have done to make something go better for my team. But when we do something good, we all did something good. Like the team wins when we do something good.
Right.
So I think now that's kind of my definition of ownership. Now that I am moving into more of a leadership role.
Right.
But at the beginning, it was just owning my code. Like, if it doesn't work, it's my fault. I'm not going to blame anybody else. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to own it. And if it goes well, I'm going to be really proud of myself because I did it. And taking the time to just make something good, not just make it good enough. From the beginning, the thing that I've really had to battle with that is perfectionism, going the other
Sure.
way,
Yep.
taking forever to make sure everything's pixel perfect. And that balance can be really difficult. But and I think that's kind of what deadlines are for. I know a lot of people don't like them, but as engineers, I think a lot of us can take way longer than we need to
Yeah.
on projects that no one else is going to care but you about that
Right.
one pixel.
But I wonder, do you find, or maybe imagine that the at smaller companies, like, do you feel like when the company is smaller and you get to have this perspective into what the business is looking like, that do you feel that that helped have an understanding of like, I know like you talk about perfectionism, but like this idea of like it's good enough, like I could keep going, I could keep trying to make it more and more perfect. I'm at the 99% of the way there to being perfect, but like the satellite's not going up in the air if I try to get this one more pixel to the right. Um, Exaggerating, obviously, but
I think it was a combination of working for small companies where you do have to move kind of quickly. You have to get stuff out, and I think that small companies tend to be a lot more agile. You make an MVP, you iterate, you improve it, you keep doing that. So there's usually an opportunity to go back, touch it again, improve it. So that helps knowing that like I can usually go back and fix things if they're not perfect, but getting it out there
Mhm.
quickly is important. The other thing, and this is maybe not the best thing, but working in the government did this as well because nothing's perfect and they don't care. In fact, if you innovate too much, they tell you to make it worse. There was a case where like we made this whole calendar, it looked awesome. We kind of designed it similar to Google because we figured people would understand that, and they're like, "No, please make it look like Outlook because we use Outlook." And we were like, "All
Well,
right."
and Outlook's
We're
just
like,
better,
"It's
right? So
I have used
no
Outlook.
bias,
It is good," but it was just funny that we were like, we made a calendar based off of the calendar lots of people use, and they're like,
right?
you have to make it different. You have to make it look like this. And we were like, okay. And
Interesting.
so I found that they didn't care about, especially from a UI perspective, which is kind of my domain. They didn't care about things being perfect. So that was also one of the reasons I left the government. I feel like they cared a little less than I wanted them to. Um, but that probably helped my perfectionism a little bit.
But it sounds like you were able, like obviously tying back to the empathy part, like if you understand what your customers are actually after, then you can start to rationalize, like, look, like if I want this to be perfect, this is what perfect looks like to me. I'm moving in that direction. But you can start to realize, like you said it, like in this case, the customers just don't value that,
Yeah.
right? They care to some point beyond that. They're like, it's almost like now you're wasting our time, you're wasting our money. Like we want you to
Mhm.
focus on something else. So I think that's really cool that you can kind of balance those different perspectives. On the ownership part, I love what you said about, because it's my philosophy. People might not agree with what you said, and but I do, because it's the way that I like to think about, you share the praise, right? Because I think that's really important, because if we're working in teams, most of the time there's like things that other team members are doing, contributing. As a
Mhm.
manager, like I don't code at work anymore, so it feels ridiculous for me to go to a group and say like, look, I did this. It's like, I absolutely didn't do it. Like, literally, there's people on my team, like five of them, that went and coded this. And I was kind of doing this and cheering them on. I try to be a little bit more involved. But the point is, like, I need to be able to share the praise. Part of that is making sure they have visibility. But the other part, and this is where I wanted to maybe add some context from my perspective on the kind of taking the blame, right? First of all, I think it's really important that people don't blame other people, because it just isn't constructive at all. If we take anything that can go wrong in a software development process, there's always multiple people along that chain, always, right? Someone wrote the code that had the bug. Who reviewed it? Right? Oh, no one reviewed it. They pushed it through. Okay, well, who owns the system that does that? Because someone missed the mark on gating things, right? Why
Mhm.
didn't the team could have thought of this as something to improve? Okay, there is gating, and we had reviewers, and no one caught it. Okay, reviewers could have done a better job.
Mhm.
You keep going down this chain, and there's always something that multiple people could have done better. So I don't like blaming. I don't think that makes sense, but at the same time, I want to make sure, like, say someone on my team is the person who committed the bug, they're taking ownership for it. I need to be able to kind of stand up and say, look, like, what could I have done better here, right? What could the team have done better? What can we all learn from this? What could we try to do better? So I want to make sure that I can shield people. At the same time, I don't want to go to an extreme where it's like they don't feel any responsibility, but I don't want them to be like, man, like I'm gonna get fired now, or I can't show my face in the team meetings. It's like, it's nothing like that. So I want to create that safe place for them, which means that I can step in and kind of take pieces of ownership. And when I mess something up, I also want to be able to say, hey, look, like, this is me, like, recognizing this thing I did wasn't great. Here's what I learned. Here's what I can do better next time. And that way, I'm hoping the more I do that, other people can see, like, look, like Nick said, it's fine when he messed up, he learned something. Maybe I should do the same thing, and then like other people can learn from it too. So I try to do that. I'm not saying I'm perfect because I got to get better, but that's how I like to look at like the ownership part for my role, at least.
Yeah, I love that. I think leading by example is a great way to show people what to do, um, especially when it comes to things that are kind of scary. I feel like almost every retro that we have, I write in, Emily did something dumb. Like, Emily did something that she should fix. And part of it is owning up to it and letting people see that I'm owning up to it. I'm like, yeah, I did this thing. It made it hard for other people. I'm going to try to do that better in the future, so that they aren't afraid to recognize like when they make mistakes and they can own up to those things too. I My favorite thing is when nobody points a finger at anyone but themselves. Um, like we'll have postmortem sometimes when something goes really awry, and sometimes somebody's like, I messed up, I did this, and I love that they're not afraid to say it, because they know that nobody's going to get mad at them for it. We're just trying to figure out how to not do it in the future and figure out where, like you said, there's always multiple steps that should catch things. So it's never just one person. Um, but the other reason that I like doing that though is to kind of hold myself accountable. It's like, I did this thing. I should not do it in the future. If I say it out loud, now I'm going to be accountable. Everybody
Yeah.
knows that I did this. If I do it again, then I haven't learned. Um, so it helps me, and I think it helps the team.
Yeah, no, I love that. The accountability thing I think is huge, right? Just really tying back into ownership. So that's that's cool. And maybe that's a good segue into a third core value for you, because you're talking about ownership, but the way that you explained that was really like being open, honest. I feel like transparency is one of your core values that ties really well into that. I will say, as a manager, one of the things that I'm not perfect at anything because no one is, but one of the things that I really try to do is be transparent with people. That means I need to be able to have hard conversations with them when things come up, whether that's because I mess something up and I need to share with them, or like, hey, there's something you can improve on. We should talk about this. Whether that's things happening in the business, which is challenging because sometimes as a manager, like I'm not an executive, I'm kind of like right between individual contributors and more senior leadership. So there's always going to be things that I have to balance and give enough information without like trying to hide things like I'm being sneaky, but not oversharing and overwhelming people, which is a tricky one. So transparency for me is huge because I feel like without that there's no trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of my spiel for transparency is really to ensure that I can build trust. But what does that look like for you? And like is it similar? Do you have these other areas where like transparency really sticks out?
Yeah, I like a lot of what you said. I think people often think that companies are just trying to hide everything from the world and from their employees.
That's
And
right.
I've heard some people on LinkedIn and out in the wild talk about
LinkedIn is the wild.
that sometimes. Um, that's a whole nother topic. But they've been talking about how companies should like share everything all the way down, and I think that it's important to share the important things, um, but not everybody has, to use a more government word, need to know on all topics, and it's actually overwhelming and unnecessary for individual contributors, especially to have a lot of high level information, especially when it hasn't been um, like fully decided on yet. There's a lot of meetings that I'm in where decisions are being made and things are being talked about, but it's not final yet, and it's burdensome to put that down on other people. Like there's a lot in my brain that is very distracting, honestly. I have so much information that I think would just be distracting to other people. And that's part of what being a leader is like figuring out what they need to know, what's important for them to know, what's important for them to know, what's helpful for them to know,
Yep.
and then telling them that. So I do definitely believe in transparency. Like, I never want to hide something that I think will be helpful to someone, but I also don't want to burden them with information that isn't helpful to them. Um, the other side of transparency, which you touched on at the beginning, is giving feedback and being really honest about that. And I think that's been one of the most difficult things in my career. I think I'm naturally a people pleaser. I
You
don't
had
like
mentioned that,
upsetting
right? Yeah.
people. I like making people happy. And so telling someone that they're, need to improve on something, or they're doing something poorly, or they did something wrong, like, is a difficult thing for me to do.
Right.
And it's kind of a cross between empathy and transparency. Over time, both personally and in work, I've discovered that leading people on is never good for them. Like, making people think that they're doing a good job when they're not is not going to help them. It's not going to help you.
Hmm.
The sooner you can tell people, like, talk to them about things that they need to improve on, the sooner they can improve. You don't want to wait till somebody's on a performance improvement plan to tell them that something's wrong, because
Yeah.
then it just comes out of left field. All that trust goes away. And I think that it's nice when you have a chance to build a little bit of a relationship with people before you have to have conversations like that, because you want them to trust you. You want them to understand that you're coming from a good place before you come in and say, hey, we need to change some stuff. But that's probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my entire life, is just to, like, you need to be direct with people as kindly as possible. But yeah, being direct is the best thing you can do, really.
Yeah. I feel like it's a pretty normal thing. Like I don't have statistics on this. I wish I did, but I assume that most people probably feel uncomfortable to have to tell someone, I don't like this. I don't like this thing you do. I think you could do this better. Anything in that kind of realm feels like this is going to be awkward, right? But I I feel like probably for most people, it's almost like we learn the hard way, right? So you end up being in this situation where you're like, oh man, if I would have told them sooner, I would avoid this situation. Both of us would not be in this awkward situation if I would have just been more transparent.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe some people understand this right away, or maybe some people just, whatever, their filter looks different and they're just happy to kind of say, like, here's the feedback, take it. I know for me, it's wildly uncomfortable to this day. I've been managing people for 12 years now, and it's always uncomfortable for me to say, we got to talk about something difficult, always. But I know what's more uncomfortable. I know it's more uncomfortable if I just keep putting it off and wait a month, 2 months. I wait until performance reviews and I go, "Yep, here's how things are." And they go, "What the hell?" And I go, what the hell am I going to say?" Like that's the most awkward, worst thing ever.
Yeah.
So you can do the tricky conversation up front, and every time you do it, at least in my experience, you have that difficult conversation. I've always felt like a burden has been lifted, and it's like, okay, wasn't so bad. And if you have built up that trust relationship with people, I often feel like they are thankful to hear that. The immediate like feedback sometimes can be like, whoa, like maybe I wasn't ready for that. Because any constructive feedback, even that I've received, it's like, yeah, it's hard. But then you go, wait, this person I have a lot of trust and respect for. Like radical candor, I think, is the phrase that gets used a lot, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this person wants me to succeed. They're not telling me this because they're a jerk. They don't think I'm a jerk. They're just like, hey, like this would be something that would make things better. Here you go. Here's the feedback. And you go, ouch. Okay, thank you. Like, thank you for that. That's good to hear. And then you end up having, my opinion is like you have this better working relationship after, because you're like, I know that this person will let me know things that are hard to hear.
Yeah.
So that's,
And most people want to improve. My best, I love my manager right now. He's very direct with me, and I really appreciate that. The first time he gave me feedback, he had this whole list of things that I could improve on. And he was like, you're doing really great, but here's a list of things that you need to improve on. And I went away from that like, oh, I wish I was already better at some of those things, but I'm really glad that he told me that I can improve in them, because now I can get better. And I also didn't feel like he thought I was doing a bad job. Like,
right.
just because he gave me negative feedback doesn't mean that like he thought I was doing a bad job. He's just like, you can be doing an even better job, and I want to be doing an even better job. Um, and yeah, Radical Candor is great. Have you read that book?
Yeah, it's been a while since I have, but yeah, this would have been. Oh man, I don't like thinking about how much white's on my beard now, or how
Yeah.
much hair is missing on the back of my head. Don't look at that. But yeah, it's been a little while. But that book is incredible. Like just to be able, like the ruinous empathy thing, I think it's the bucket that most of us fall into because we're like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, I don't want to stir the pot here. Like you're doing good,
Yeah.
and it's like that's so bad. It's
Yeah, like
just not
most
helpful
people
for
will,
anyone.
I think without feedback, most people will coast. They're like, oh, I'm doing good enough. I don't need to change anything. And if you don't tell them, how can they improve? Um, Even if they think that they can improve in an area, they're like, well, if everybody else thinks it's good enough, maybe I don't need to. I do actually prefer the phrase that she talks about in the beginning, compassionate candor. She had originally thought about
Hmm.
naming the book that instead of radical candor, and I think it fits what she talks about better. Um, but
Yeah, there. I can't remember the exact example. Or I know there's more than one, but there's one example in the book. I'm pretty sure she basically says like someone that she respected said like you sound stupid when you talk like that, and like I feel like that's like a very exaggerated like that's radical candor, and I think given that it's so radical for me, it just like sticks in my brain.
mhm.
Like I think that's a pretty rare thing to have in a work relationship, but if I think about my best friends, if I think about projects I build on the side with my best friends, if one of my best friends said to me like, hey, it's that's actually like if they said that's a stupid thing, like I wouldn't be like, oh man, like you're such a jerk. I would be like, I know that, like I know them, I trust them, they're my best friends, like if we're working on something together or they want me to succeed, like why would they're not going to try to do something to hurt me.
Yeah.
So I love the, I don't know what the right word is for that, like the contrast almost, but I think you're right that the more sort of like general way that we would see this kind of thing come up is truly like it is about being compassionate. It's not trying to like, I don't know. You don't need to be so jarring with the feedback or the presentation of the feedback, but I think the example like really sticks though.
Yeah, I think it fit. Like, you really definitely have to judge what your relationship is with the person, like how much they trust you. And you can
Yeah.
probably be a little more aggressive like that with somebody who you have a good relationship with. But if you're just coming in, you might want to tone it down a little
Yeah.
bit.
And that's exactly right. Because if you were to do that and you hadn't built that relationship, then someone's really going to be like, what the hell are you talking about?
Random
Uh,
person just came in and called me stupid.
yeah. The I've shared this before in one of my interviews, but my recent example with my manager, and I don't think he would mind me sharing this because, and I hope not because I've already said it on recording before. But I'm new to the team as of earlier this year, and he had given me some tasks to go carry out, and important tasks that have a lot of visibility. I said no problem, so started working on them with my team, and we were doing a one-on-one, catching up on some things, and he asked me how one of the projects was going. I said, great, here's, we made a lot of progress and started explaining how different people work on different aspects. And he cut me off, like not, and I don't say this like he was being a jerk, but he kind of just like interrupted me. It was like, no, 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 what are you doing? And I remember looking at him and just being like, I thought I just told you, but I could tell he was trying to hint at something. He's like, what part of this are you doing? And I remember being like I delegated the work. That's I don't think that's wrong. And I don't think that he thinks that's wrong either. But the point that he was getting across is that he's trying to make sure that I have a piece that I can truly own for myself. So that when it comes time to talk about promotions and things like that, it's not, hey, look, Nick delegated all this work and it got done. He knows it's going to get done and it's going to be done well. But he's trying to say, hey, look, if you have some ownership more directly in this, that that's going to be helpful when I have to go, speak on your behalf for promotions. So I had to read between the lines a little bit, and he didn't come right out and say like, "Do this, you get promoted." But it was really like, if this is what you're after, like, hint, hint, like you need to have a little bit more hands on. And I remember being like, I don't get feedback like that a lot. It's usually like, cool, like things are going okay, great. But to hear that and like he's a like new manager for me, I was like, I really appreciate that. And now I know if I am screwing something up, he's going to come knocking right away. And that's going to be awesome to hear him say, like, this has got to change. Here's how we're going to improve it. Or what are your thoughts for improving it? And I
Yeah.
feel good about that. Not like, oh man, my manager's so mean.
Well, it's so great when somebody sets the expectation so clearly too. It's like, no, I want to know what you're doing, and you need to be doing things that you can communicate to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really
That's
helpful.
exactly it. So that was my experience. I thought it was super cool to have someone kind of come right out and say it. I'm doing a time check. We got a little bit of time left, but there's one more core value that we got to touch on, and it's
Yeah,
simplicity. And I assume you don't just mean delete all the code because that would be the most simple.
that
When
would
you
be
talk about simplicity, that would be awesome. What does simplicity look like for you in general? And do you have some examples of where like something wasn't simple and simplicity was introduced and just like transformed what that looked like?
Yeah, I think simplicity is a hard balance for a lot of people. I hear a lot of people talk about dry, don't repeat yourself principles, and I think some people take that way too far. They make
Hmm.
it so like every component, everything like if you reuse this line, it has to be a component.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's the hardest thing that I've encountered to make simple is when product comes and they're like, we want you to take these two things and we want you to put them together like they're the same thing. And we've run into this in our current product. We have a credentialing system
Okay.
where we have a nursing platform. Nurses can put in all kinds of different types of credentials, driver's license, skills assessments, all these other licenses and things that they have, tuberculosis tests, like just all kinds of things that they need to be able to work at a hospital. And a lot of them are very different. They are validated in different ways, they expire in different ways, they can be satisfied in different ways. So we had a very simple credentialing system that handled, our normal cases. And then we started introducing more complicated types of credentials. They could be
Okay.
satisfied in multiple ways. They expired in different ways that were, and it wasn't just like a date that it expired on and they need a new one. Um, and so for the first one, we wrote like this edge case. We were like, oh, it's fine. We'll just write an edge case. We don't want to refactor the whole thing. And then we had to write another edge case, and we had to write another one. And we were like, okay. Um, and in order to make it simpler, we had to make the base system more complicated, which seems counterintuitive to some people because we had a very simple version, but we made a more robust dynamic system that looked a lot more complicated initially, but it was able to handle every type of credential now. So in the end, it simplified um, our implementation of the credentialing system because now we didn't have all these edge cases. We didn't have to try to take things that were totally different in
Hmm.
both in the database and from a UI perspective and try to like mash them together. Everything was the same. It was handled in the database the same way. It was handled in the UI the same way. Um, and as a really interesting example to me of where we really had to make something much more complicated in order to actually make it simpler.
Well, it
Um,
sounds like you were optimizing for something, right? Like the if and I haven't seen the system. I'm the first time I'm hearing it, so I'm kind of speculating about how this looks. But instead of saying, "Hey, every time we want to go implement something, it's an edge case," what ended up happening was you took something that existed, like the core part of the system, and you basically said, "We have all of this complexity that's kind of spread everywhere with these edge cases. We know that we're going to keep extending this. There's going to be more of these that come along. We want that process to feel easy. Let's optimize for making that easy." So you push the complexity into a spot. You're like, okay, this thing just got way more complex right here. Everything else and when we go to extend it becomes easier as a result of that. Is that a fair way to put that?
yeah, and
To me,
it
that sounds
I
like a
feel like
facade. That's like
yeah,
my favorite design pattern. So
I feel like it ends up being very elegant because we wrapped it all up in a library, so no one has to understand how it's working. They just get to use it now. So it's really
right.
easy. It's
You
if you want to
you
put a
put the
credential somewhere, we have a little package for you. Put it over
yep.
here, and it
The
doesn't matter how.
complexity is all in one spot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super cool.
Yeah, I had
But how do
another
you
example. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
another
Go ahead.
another example recently where I overcomplicated something.
Okay.
And this is where, simple is better than clever, but sometimes it's
Sure.
really fun to be clever. And I had to make something responsive. And so I had three different sizes where the design was pretty different. So I was like, okay, I'll make a mobile one, and then I'll make a small one, and then I'll make a big one. And they were all completely separate. And there was re um, a lot of repeated stuff between those.
Okay.
And then I was like, I wonder if I can make this just one. And I managed to do it, but almost every line had an if statement on it that changed the styles. And I was like, I felt really clever. I was like, wow, I did it. But if anyone ever has to change it, they will break it.
Yeah.
And I was like, the other one, while it is bigger and it doesn't look simple, was simpler from a maintainability standpoint.
Right.
So there were some repeated parts that I did pull out. So I did make it less repeated and, improved on it. But that was a situation where I was like, I could make it, just one. It looks nice. It looks simple. It works. But when it comes to somebody actually trying to read this or change it, it's going to be impossible.
Right. No,
Um,
that totally makes sense. And like again, I feel like you're optimizing for different things, right? Probably in that one example, you were like, "Hey, if I format it this way and I don't feel like I'm doing three separate things entirely, now it feels like hopefully feels more elegant, like you said, it's more clever. You're trying to lean into maybe some of the way that you're designing software, because the other way, when you start having duplication and stuff, you might have more code. It might feel like it's kind of gross that you have these three separate things when really, like, fundamentally it's kind of the same thing. But it just goes back to your earlier point about dry, right? It's like you probably were thinking like, hey, these are similar, like let me just do this thing where it's not repeated. But the reality is, like, you probably needed to repeat some of it to make it more clear, more readable, more
mhm.
maintainable, and it was a trade-off.
Yeah. And at some point, maintainability is more important. Unless you really have to optimize something for performance, like being able to read it is just so good.
Yeah, totally. Have you found with simplicity outside of code, like, do you have any, like, is because it is a core competency of yours? Have you thought, or core competency, core value? I bet my head's been somewhere else writing newsletters and stuff for core competencies, and I've been on call. So, um, for your core values, my apologies. When you talk about simplicity, do you see this coming up in like processes, team interactions, things, or like primarily do you view it, or at least from your experience, it's been more like focused on code design and architecture?
I think this applies to all aspects of my life. My husband and I both agree that we very much prefer life in general to be simpler. Our kids do very
Okay.
few activities. We try not to do a bunch of extracurricular stuff and clutter up our lives. In the same way, try not to clutter up my work life either. So I like to have a minimal amount of meetings. I think everybody probably does, but I try
Yeah.
to actually make that happen. If things can be done asynchronously, we do them asynchronously, and then we just kind of hop on calls as we need to because I don't want to preemptively make everyone join the meeting at a time that might not be optimal for everyone.
Right.
Um, every once in a while, it is really useful to get a bunch of people in a room. That just is true. But
Yep.
um, yeah, processes, I think, being minimal and thing, being able to change them for different people. So, like, we have one kind of core process at our company, but every team can change it to work for themselves.
Okay.
So if people want more structure, they can do that. If people want less structure, they can do that. I do the same with my engineering documents that I write. I think going simpler is better. What is the concept of making decisions at the last responsible moment?
Okay.
I don't know if that's the right phrasing, but not everything has to be decided by me in an engineering document. It's okay to be like, this is what we want to do, and you can decide how we do it. If there's not a decision that I need to make or that I feel really strongly about, I try to let my developers make those decisions. I think it's good for me because I have to do less thinking. I think it's good for them because they get to decide trade-offs for themselves and go through that process themselves. I think it helps them level up better to have those experiences. And I'm very clear that if they want to talk about it, I'm always here to talk about it and discuss those trade-offs and things with them. Sometimes I have opinions and I'll be like, I would recommend doing something like this. But if you think that that's a bad idea and you think there's a better way to do it, or you understand this section of the code better than I do, maybe you know a better way to do it, and I'm open to that. So, um, yeah, giving the least amount of details required. It's my method.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's like it's just not being overly prescriptive, and like you said, I love that you called out that can give opportunity for other people as well, right? Selfishly, less work
Mm-hmm.
for you. Uh,
Yeah.
Unselfishly, better opportunities for other people to be able to, I don't know, to be able to grow in different ways. And it's something you kind of said right near the beginning of our talk, like being in a position where people just hand you like fully thought out, like just go type the lines of code and move on to the next thing. Like no one really likes that. So
Yeah.
that's
Most passionate engineers don't want to be code monkeys. They want to
yeah.
actually create something themselves.
We like code, but we want to be able to have some creativity and solve problems as well. No, that thank you for the explanation on the simplicity. I think that's your set of core values. I know we're little over time, but I wanted to ask you one more thing, and I really wanted to hear about it. But you said that you have a motto, which is walk through open doors, and I wanted to hear a little bit about this, maybe to kind of sign things off.
Yeah, so this is something my dad would say to me when I was pretty young. He always say, walk through open doors. And my husband always makes fun of me. He's like, well, what are you going to walk through closed doors? Um, but just take the opportunities that are given to you. My dad is a neurosurgeon, and he says that that fell in his lap in a way. Like, he went to med school. He was planning to be a doctor, but he had no idea what kind. And that was just a door that opened to him, and he walked through it, and he hasn't regretted it. Um, and I kind of feel that way in my software career. Like, I was going to school for mechanical engineering, but I applied to every job that was available because I was like, well, if I get one, I get one.
There's an
And
open door.
if they think that they can train me and that I can do a good job, like, I'll do it. Whether it's an electrical engineering job, mechanical, software, like, I'll do it. And the door to software engineering opened. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it, but I walked through it, and I really love what's come from it. And I've done that multiple times in my career where I've just walked into things that ended up being great, and some often things that I didn't think I was qualified for.
Ah, yes.
Um, if anyone believes I can do it, if somebody gives me the opportunity, I will take it. And if I do horribly, then I will learn something from it. And if I do great, then that's another accomplishment, I guess.
Then great things happen. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's really cool. No, I love that. That's awesome. I have an example of that from earlier this year when I switched teams at Microsoft. I literally thought I was going to meet my current manager, because I was on the deployment team before, and we owned a service that we were transitioning to this other team where my current manager is, where I am
Mm-hmm.
now. And I thought we were meeting to go talk about that transition. And when we got onto the call, he was basically saying, "Hey, kind of curious about your career because we have a position opening." And I just remember being like, "It's not even. I didn't even think that's what this meeting was about." And I am very much the kind of person I'm very conservative in the actions I take. I don't like taking risks. It's too uncomfortable. But I have found in my career that every time I am forced into something, it ends up being really awesome. I learn a lot. And in this case, it wasn't forced, but it was like there is this opportunity. And I just remember thinking like it just felt like it would be stupid for me to not try this. Like
Mm-hmm.
here is an opportunity. It would be negligent for me to be like, no, no, because it was going to be uncomfortable. It was going to
Mm-hmm.
be something I would learn a lot, something that I don't know anything about routing and my current team is doing. Like I felt like I'm going to be so unqualified on the technical side. But then I remember like when I graduated from university, I went to a digital forensics company. I didn't know anything about forensics. That company was sold for $2 billion. Like, we did something right. I got to learn a lot along the way. So good things will happen. And if they don't pan out that way, you're going to learn so much anyway. So I absolutely love that. I think that's tattoo worthy.
Yeah.
That's got to go somewhere.
And what's crazy is that it doesn't really get less scary. I have, past experience to rely on, be like, I've done this a million times. I've changed jobs and every time I'm scared and every time it works out. But it doesn't make it any less intimidating to
Yeah.
do those things, especially
Yep.
when it's just so new and different. You just do it and it works out.
Yep. I've heard one person on LinkedIn talk about this type of thing, and they say, I always do that. And I'm like, how do you feel comfortable doing that? That sounds made up, because it does not feel comfortable to me in any way. But truthfully, if I reflect on it, it has always been positive. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
well, this has been really awesome, Emily. I wanted to ask, do you have, like, if people want to get in touch with you, do you want to share, like, I can get links and stuff from you after, but do you want to share with anyone where they can reach out to you and connect with you?
Pretty much just LinkedIn. I don't have any other form of social media anymore. I hate all of it. um, but yeah, anyone, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I've really started to enjoy LinkedIn recently. I used to just get on there when I needed a job, and I feel like I've discovered this software community, and it's pretty fun, except for the discussions about test-driven development, which I am going to try, actually. I've heard enough good things. I'm like, I should try it and have an opinion on it so that I can be obnoxious like everybody else.
Yeah, then you can go fight the TDD people and say, look, I tried it and I hate it. No, I'm just kidding. Like, everyone's got different perspectives on things. I think TDD has many awesome things, but I don't think there's one right way to do everything all the time. And anyone who disagrees is always wrong.
I like the concept. I'll try it. Try
Yeah.
anything. I don't
Yeah.
think
No,
I'll
I
ever
think
be
that's awesome.
diehard either way, but that's it.
I try to be pragmatic as much as I can. So I feel like if there's things I can learn about different perspectives, it's like, hey, might as well try it. I learned something from it. So
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, well, Emily, thank you so much. Like I said, if you have any other links and stuff that you want me to add, if it's just LinkedIn, I know where to get that. I will add that. And yeah, thank you for making the time to sit down and chat with me, and for sharing your core values.
Yeah, this has been fun.
Cool stuff. Okay, we'll chat soon.
See ya.